Today, we are unraveling what is essentially a 2,000-year-old philosophical detective story. It's a mystery that strikes at the absolute core of who you are, asking one very simple yet mind-bending question. How do you actually know, well, anything? We're going to trace this single profound puzzle all the way from the sunlit steps of ancient Athens straight into the cognitive science labs of the 20th century. So get comfortable, because we are about to completely rethink the inside of your own head. Okay, so let's ground this whole mystery in a modern marvel, something so commonplace we almost totally take it for granted. Think about a toddler for a second. In just a few short years, this tiny human miraculously learns to navigate the incredibly complex, mathematically precise rules of language. And they do it flawlessly, without a single formal lesson. I mean, how is that even possible? The data they get from their environment is chaotic, it's incomplete, it's full of grammatical errors. Yet they just effortlessly crack the code. So are they really starting with a totally blank slate, or did they show up to the party with some kind of secret biological code already downloaded? To find our very first clue, we actually need to travel back to ancient Greece and look at this brilliant intellectual trap known as Meno's paradox. It was recorded by the philosopher Plato, and Meno poses a real brain-breaker to Socrates. He asks, how can you search for something if you don't even know what it is? Think about it carefully. If you have no idea what you're looking for, you aren't going to recognize it when you find it, right? But if you already know what it is, well, there's absolutely no need to look for it at all. It basically implies that learning something entirely from scratch is logically impossible. To solve this ancient puzzle, Plato drops a wildly radical concept called anamnesis. He suggests that genuine foundational knowledge isn't actually learned through our senses at all. Instead, it is remembered. He argued that before we were even born, our immortal souls encountered these eternal, perfect truths, what he called the forms. But when we're born into a physical body, the trauma of birth basically gives us amnesia. So what we call learning is really just the soul being prompted by questions to recall the innate wisdom it already possesses. Mind-blowing, right? Now, to prove this wasn't just, theoretical nonsense, Plato gives us this fantastic story in his dialogue, The Meno. Socrates takes an uneducated slave boy who has absolutely zero background in geometry. He draws a 2-foot square and asks the kid how to double its area. At first, the boy guesses wrong. He says just double the sides, which, of course, actually quadruples the area. But here's the kicker. Socrates doesn't teach him the right answer. He just asks him a series of carefully guided questions. And without a single piece of new information being handed to him, the boy deduces on his own that you use the diagonal of the original square to create the new one. Socrates proves anamnesis right there in the dirt. The knowledge was inside the boy the whole time. It was just waiting to be unlocked. All right, let's move on to Section 1, Divine Illumination, Augustine's Guiding Light. Fast forward to the 4th century. A philosopher and theologian named St. Augustine takes a look at Plato's idea, and he realizes a pre-existing soul just doesn't quite fit with his Christian theology. But he totally agrees that we don't get absolute truth just from looking at the physical world. So Augustine introduces the theory of divine illumination, and he uses this gorgeous solar metaphor. He says, just as your physical eyes absolutely need the sun's light to see a tree or a rock, your mind's eye needs a divine, intellectual light to see eternal truths like math or logic. God is that light. And the truly fascinating part here? Augustine argued that even an absolute atheist who correctly solves a math problem is using this divine illumination. They just don't realize where the light is coming from. Which brings us to Section 2, the great debate, rationalism versus empiricism. As we roll into the 17th and 18th centuries, our mystery literally splits the greatest thinkers of the era into two warring camps. On one side, we have the empiricists, championed by thinkers like John Locke. Now, Locke completely rejects innate ideas and divine light. He introduces a term you've probably heard, tabula rasa, or the blank slate. Locke argues that when you are born, your mind is basically an empty, dark room. Absolutely every single piece of knowledge you will ever possess has to enter through the doors of your senses, what you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Zero preloaded software allowed. It is the ultimate clash of the titans. On the left, we've got rationalists like René Descartes and Baruch Spinoza arguing that internal reason and innate ideas are the only way to find certain absolute truth, mostly because our senses can so easily deceive us. Then, on the right, empiricists like Locke and David Hume are insisting that you cannot know anything without experiencing it first, relying entirely on observation and induction. It seems like a total unbreakable deadlock. I mean, how do you reconcile the internal power of reason with the external reality of the senses? And that sets us up perfectly for Section 3, the plot twist, Kant's Copernican Revolution. Late in the 18th century, Immanuel Kant enters the chat and delivers the massive plot twist our detective story desperately needed. He looks at the rationalists and the empiricists fighting it out and realizes they're actually both right and they're both wrong. To fix the deadlock, Kant performs what he very boldly called his own Copernican revolution. Just as Copernicus realized the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth, Kant realized that our minds don't just passively revolve around the objects we see. Instead, he argued, reality as we experience it must conform to the structure of our own minds. The mind is not some passive empty theater just waiting for sensory data. It is an active, brilliant architect that takes raw data and literally builds our reality. Kant explained that concepts like space, time, and cause and effect aren't just things floating out there in the universe that we stumble upon and discover. They are the built-in structural preconditions of human consciousness. Think of them like a pair of virtual reality goggles that are permanently strapped to your head. Without the mind imposing these structures on the chaotic noise of the outside world, we couldn't make sense of anything. We would literally have no experience at all. So Kant proved that while all knowledge begins with experience, it definitely doesn't all arise purely from experience. All right, let's jump ahead to Section 4, the modern verdict, science steps in. Jumping into the 20th century, cognitive science finally brings some hard empirical data to our mystery. The blank slate is about to face its toughest scientific test yet. In the late 1950s, linguist Noam Chomsky drops an absolute bombshell on the scientific community with his concept of universal grammar. Remember how we talked about children learning language way too fast for the messy data they actually receive? Well, Chomsky argues this happens because humans are born with a genetically determined, highly specialized blueprint already in our minds. It's an innate set of abstract rules common to all human languages. The child isn't learning from scratch at all. They are just filling in the local details, whether that's English, Spanish, or Chinese, on a framework that was already there. Chomsky completely shattered the whole blank slate idea. He suggested that we shouldn't think of the mind as a general-purpose sponge, but rather as being composed of highly specialized organs. Just like your DNA programs your body to grow a heart for pumping blood, it programs your brain to grow a language organ for processing syntax. Language isn't just something we go out and learn. It's something that literally grows inside us, governed by our biology. So Plato's ancient idea of innate knowledge finally found a home in modern genetics. How cool is that? Next up, Section 5. Decoding cognitive architecture, Fodor's modularity. In the 1980s, a philosopher and cognitive scientist named Jerry Fodor took Chomsky's idea of a specialized language organ, and he expanded it into this massive, overarching theory about all of human cognition. He called it the modularity of mind. Fodor argued that our brains are just packed with these specialized, highly automated processors working entirely behind the scenes. He called them modules. And these modules are incredible. They're domain-specific, meaning they only do one specific job, like face recognition or color processing. They're fast and mandatory, meaning you literally can't choose not to hear spoken English as words if you know the language. And most importantly, they're informationally encapsulated. That's a fancy way of saying they do their job without ever checking in with the rest of your brain's belief systems. Let me give you a perfect example of this, and let's see if your own brain can beat it. Have you ever looked at the famous Mueller-Lyer optical illusion? It's the one with two horizontal lines. One has outward-pointing arrows on the ends, and the other has inward-pointing arrows. The top line always looks longer, right? Now, even after you take a ruler, physically measure them, and know, for an absolute factual certainty that they are identical, they still look different. Why? Because your visual module is informationally encapsulated. It doesn't care what your conscious, rational brain knows to be true. It just mandatorily crunches that visual data and feeds you the result, whether you like it or not. So Fodor basically summarizes the modern mind as this incredible hybrid system. Out on the edges, you have these lightning-fast, hardwired innate modules handling perception and language, which is the ultimate biological proof that we are definitely not blank slates. But right in the center, you have your general-purpose non-modular system. This is the space where you form beliefs, reason through problems, and make deliberate choices. The edge modules feed raw data to the central system, and that central system creates the conscious you. We are this breathtaking mix of ancient, pre-programmed architecture and open-ended rational thought.
Wow. So we've traveled all the way from Plato's soul-remembering geometry to Kant's mind actively building reality, straight through to Chomsky and Fodor's hardwired brain modules. The blank slate hasn't just been challenged, it's been thoroughly rewritten, which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder as we wrap up. If our minds actively construct reality through these innate, hidden biological modules that operate completely outside our conscious control, just how much of what makes you, was totally pre-programmed before you even opened your eyes? Thank you so much for joining me